Hello and welcome to What's Happening in Myanmar, a weekly show from the Frontier Myanmar podcast family. I'm your host, Luke Corbin, joining you for episode 12 this Friday, January 24, 2025. And today, I'm joined by a digital security trainer from the Myanmar Internet Project, MIP, and the Spring Revolution Security, SRS, organizations, using the pseudonym Vox. So, hello, Vox.
Thanks for inviting, Kokang. Yeah, so I'm Vox. Yeah.
It's been a big news week in Myanmar this week, but today, Vox and I are going to talk about something of great import over the longer term. That's the new Cybersecurity Law that was enacted at the beginning of this year. But before that, I'll go over some of the major stories this week, with a reminder first that if you are a Frontier subscriber, you can receive daily updates on Myanmar straight to your inbox with timely insights and translations of Burmese language news stories and social media posts. Now into the news. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, held a foreign ministers' retreat in Malaysia on January 19 this week. Ministers there called on the Myanmar military to prioritise a ceasefire with resistance groups over its much-touted election plan. Malaysia is now chair of the bloc, taking over from Laos, and its appointed diplomat Othman Hashim as the new ASEAN Special Envoy on Myanmar. Hashim has a human rights background and is tasked with implementing the bloc's maligned five-point consensus peace plan to end the post-coup conflict. Observers remain sceptical given the military's ongoing intransigence. And yet, in perhaps the biggest development this week, news broke that the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, or the MNDAA, had finally signed a ceasefire with the Myanmar military last week on January 16. This pauses a string of victories against the military since October 2023, MNDAA victories which were briefly interrupted by a previous short-lived ceasefire last year. The exact terms of the new ceasefire are unknown, but differing reports are claiming that the MNDAA will be withdrawing from Lashio before June, and that the military will be back in that town to jointly administrate it with the MNDAA. Whatever happens in Lashio and whether this ceasefire holds or not, China has already reopened several border gates across northern Shan State, giving a reprieve to communities there that have endured their closure for months. And of course, the MNDAA is in an alliance with the Arakan Army. As the military continued reinforcing Sittwe in Rakhine State this week, the Arakan Army, or AA, pushed further into Ayeyarwady region, taking control of a military base in Bormi village, which is close to Chwetaungyan on the west coast, and heading towards the famous Chaungtha beach resort area, where hotels are still operating under threat of confiscation by military authorities. During the Bormi beachside battle, the Myanmar Navy shelled the town from several ships, and residents claimed to BBC Burmese and Radio Free Asia that 4 military tanks were destroyed in the Bormi fighting, along with over 400 houses and 10,000 people displaced. There was also fighting in Yiji Township and on the important route from Ann Township into Mugwe, where the AA reportedly captured 2 more military outposts. The AA was also in the news for other reasons than military victories this week. They were accused of forcibly recruiting ethnic Mro people. This has been going for a long time, as reported on by Frontier previously. And then, more shockingly, verified footage was reported on by Fortify Rights on Thursday, showing AA fighters torturing and killing prisoners of war under their protection with machetes. The AA admitted that its fighters executed the detained regime soldiers, saying, "It's entirely contrary to our policy, and we don't tolerate such unlawful behaviour." They also admitted to forcibly recruiting around 90 Mro people in Maundor Township since December 24 last year. But spokesperson Kain Thuka reframed it as the AA providing self-defense training to the ethnic Mro. The last time the AA was accused with evidence of war crimes, however, it flatly denied them. But speaking of war crimes, the Myanmar Air Force hit an AA detention facility in Rau with airstrikes this week, killing at least 28 prisoners of war and their family members, according to the armed group. This included 8 children. Another notable drone and airstrike from the military this week took place in Waimor, Kachin State, in a banana orchard, resulting in the deaths of 1 Burmese and 1 Chinese citizen. The military also rained bombs on Nang Cho, a town now held for 6 months by the Daang National Liberation Army. There, at least 9 people died this week, and several buildings were destroyed, including a municipal office, police station, and a tea shop. There were also more peculiar attacks by paramotor this week. These unusual operations involve military soldiers flying low and slow in small petrol-operated vehicles that use a sail to stay afloat in the air. The soldiers then drop small bombs on villages. They've been used several times to attack the area surrounding the Shanti Air Force Base in Megtila in particular, hitting villages in Chaungtha township and occasionally causing deaths and injuries. Local resistance forces speculate the military is using the paramotors to attack from the air without using expensive aviation fuel. And so far, resistance forces still have not shot a paramotor down, though they are in theory vulnerable to small arms fire, unlike a jet plane. But on the ground in Magwe region, resistance forces have managed to destroy Air Force armaments and support equipment this week. According to a spokesperson for the resistance force Young Revolutionary Front in Bauk Township, Magwe, several soldiers were killed when resistance forces launched a rocket attack at a military armament factory in Seipu Township in Magwe on January 18. The group claims the attack destroyed 1 warehouse used for storing Air Force bombs and damaged 3 others. The military's control of the skies is, of course, its key military advantage over resistance forces, and the resistance forces for their part are increasingly targeting airports and arms factories. This week, the military deployed an infantry battalion to strengthen their hold of Sidway Airport in one of the few areas that it still controls in Rakhine State. And there was a flurry of talk from several sides this week about Myanmar's many lawlessly lucrative scam compounds, starting with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi calling on ASEAN to take stronger action on online gambling and cyber scams on January 16. The Military State Administration Council then let loose a bellicose statement through military-controlled media, blaming basically everyone but themselves for the cyber scam centres in Myanmar's borderlands. On January 21, Military Vice Senior General So Win then met with a Thai military delegation to discuss the issue, with many platitudes expressed but seemingly no new initiatives. And to cap the week off, Chinese state media reported that China would continue cooperating with countries in the region on cross-border initiatives like rescuing the victims of cyber scam operations. This came after a meeting this week with senior regional officials in Kunming. Several resistance groups, for their part, also released statements this week expressing they would cooperate with neighbouring countries to crack down on scam centres. And the Korean National Union spoke to the media more pointedly, telling the Democratic Voice of Burma, I quote, "The real culprit behind rampant cyber scam syndicates is the Military State Administration Council," end quote. It's in this atmosphere that Thailand authorities installed new checkpoints and signs in Mae Sot town warning people not to fall for cyber scams and trafficking on the border. They're also now erecting updated barbed wire fences along the border at Payatongsu, which is also called the Three Pagodas Pass area in Guyana State's Jain Sekji Township, where some scam centres have moved to from the north, as we've mentioned on this show. The border was more heavily fenced in the past there, and one resident said that Thai officials and security forces have been stepping up their patrols and inspections. Thai news outlets also reported this week that many more CCTV cameras have been deployed along the Thailand-Myanmar border. And it remains dangerous even trying to reach that border from the Myanmar side, especially as a young person, subject to the military's desperate conscription law. Dozens of people en route to Thailand to find work were reportedly arrested on January 18 at a guest house in the Tanantari capital, Dawei. They were arrested for not being recorded on the guest house's overnight guest list. They were taken from the hotel in dump trucks headed to a military base, and local residents fear they will now be conscripted. Relatedly, the military declared this week that it has promulgated the actual rules governing its conscription law, with 10 detailed chapters outlined, including one, I quote from, supposedly on the rights of people's military servants. But the contents of these rules and what these rights are not yet available. And of course, people have been abducted for conscription for nearly a year now, with no oversight or transparency. Frontier Myanmar has actually published a feature story on the current state of conscription abductions just this Friday. And in news from a few weeks back, the State Administration Council enacted its new cybersecurity law on January 1st. The law was announced originally years ago and has been given close attention by the media and civil society throughout its development. 3 weeks on from its release, I thought it would be a good time to set the record straight on the development of the law, what it means legally now, and what it may produce in practice. So, Vox, the origins of this law, they actually lie with the National League for Democracy administration back in 2019. At that time, it had support from the Japan government, and I believe consultants from Singapore were also involved in providing inputs to the first draft law. Could you tell us more about this law's drafting and the timeline, how it got to its final form, why it was enacted now in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to my knowledge, I think that's also the case. Starting from January 2019, I think Singapore firm are under the direction of MOTC, the civilian government's ministry, with the technical assistance from World Bank, I believe. So they drafted this law. It was actually kind of like a supplement to the long-standing e-government initiative that started from the early 2010s. So it met with a lot of criticism, but then I think it's more of like a inception of the need for this law, right? Because like people, especially civil society and the industry, they actually pointed out that this law was not very encompassing and very comprehensive. So I think they also kind of did another draft. There was another draft in 2020, and then the law that is enacted now, it's more similar to the one that was drafted on 2021 February, as I think it was kind of like the first thing they did after taking over from the power. Yeah. If we want to kind of like compare these laws in with the timeline, right? So I think in the 2021 version, it was like February, the very earliest part of the February 2021. It also met with a lot of criticism, especially from industry leaders and groups like UMFCCI, or they were all very vocal about it. And then it kind of went underground and then kind of resurfaced back in 2022. But then I think what I noticed consistently in 2021 and 2022 version is the criminalization of the use of VPN, right? So it's actually illegal to use VPN in according to the provision of 2021 and 2022 Cybersecurity Law draft. So, and then it also included a section, I believe it was under Chapter 6 or something like that. I think protection of our personal information. They actually had it in also 2021 and 2022 version. But by analyzing it, what we actually noticed is that they actually also enacted a separate law, right? The electronic transaction law in mid-February, or an earlier part of the coup. It actually started this kind of like the concept of intermediary liability for companies that is operating inside the country to be accountable with how they operate and how they comply with their request. And then it actually included I believe it is actually the same section of the protection of personal information. So it's actually kind of like a duplicate section in both the ETL and also the 2021 and 2022 draft. So yeah, but then I think the actually enacted one, it no longer contain anything as to the protection of personal information anymore. I think we can talk more on it on the current version down the line. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. That's very helpful. Now, this next question might be a little bit tricky, but as we've said, because the origins of this law, they lie in a time when there was a more open information environment in Myanmar. And so we know about the foreign experts that were involved in the beginning of the cybersecurity law's development. I wonder if you know if the military continued using any foreign experts to develop this eventual law. Do you have any idea about that, or do you think it was entirely in-house within the military and their bureaucracy?
Prior to the coup, the civilian government is not perfect. It's like even in 2019 law, they had all these that is like designating hate speech and defamation, especially against the government, and they actually did block 1,500 or so websites even in April 2019. So, but then the thing is that so there was a bit of transparency in it, and then we know that who is involved in this legislation process, this drafting process. But right now, we actually have very limited info about the parties involved. But if I'm not wrong, there is actually a news from the state media in August September 2024 that they're actually doing a committee finalizing the draft law, and it came out in 2025. So we have to get back to the question, we have very limited idea about who is involved in this, but looking at the development of the situation, because like when it comes to this kind of digital repression, what we notice is that so there is one thing to set up this legal framework and all these legislation in one part, and another part is to actually have the technical capability to actually carry out this one. So I think it's kind of like it's no coincidence that we actually had this VPN block in 2024, I believe May 30th or 29th, I believe. So this is kind of like a developing situation, and they have this tech framework already, and this cybersecurity law actually seals the deal with the frameworks. Yeah.
Yes, you're right, of course. And we need to think about this cybersecurity law in conjunction with the increasing technical capacity and the VPN shutdowns that we saw last year. I want to ask you, I guess, directly now about this 2025 enacted law. How does it compare to other cybersecurity laws, and what are its most egregious aspects in your view?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually had another framework, which was enacted in, I think, March 2023, which was the lawful interception framework that they added to the counter anti-terrorism law. I mean, looking at this law, there are some components that should be there. For example, like holding companies and operators accountable for their security setup, to have proper security setup. These are the good things. But then, if we look at this lawful interception framework, they actually have no oversight. There is only one company, but that is kind of like approving all these requests from the authorities. So there is no oversight mechanism on this. And then I also want to kind of point out that we don't have any privacy protection. Especially with I think it's the first thing they did is that they actually amended the law protecting the privacy and security of the citizens in the Constitution. Like they actually took away the part that it wrote that the police requires warrant and such to actually raid your house, to seize your device. So by deleting that part, what they can do is under the guise of national security, they can come into your house, they can seize your device, they can question everything. Can't even deny your personal or your intellectual property, which is possible. You have to give access to it. So there is no protection for us, and with this lack of oversight, this is going to provide a comprehensive framework for their law enforcement agency and the military to actually get any data they want. I mean, one thing, though, on one hand, corporations, like, we have no say over what data we generate during our digital activity. Like, for example, we use Grab, and then it leaves the data. It leaves the data from where do we go and what kind of registration data, whatever data we provided. Let's say Grab is responsible for keeping that data safe. And then by keeping that data safe, they're also liable to provide that data to the authorities should they ever, if they ever wanted to get it. So I think it's the first thing with this is that we have no protection and that there is no oversight with it. So there is like many room for abuse, and I don't believe, as a digital rights activist, I don't think that this is in good faith. As usual with the Myanmar law, starting from like cystic and everything. So what we see again is here is the vague wording citing national securities and criminalization of online activities. So it's going to be so if they were to prosecute according to this law, it's one of the easily abusable provisions in this law.
Okay, that is a helpful overview. And now that you've brought Grab, for example, and the data privacy protection and lack of protection, I suppose, into the conversation, I wanted to ask you more about businesses and about how you think this new cybersecurity law will affect business and, I suppose, the economy in Myanmar. On the one hand, you need to have laws like this to make businesses feel comfortable. But on the other hand, some of these restrictions could really just kind of prevent economic activity.
This kind of repression is actually very harmful to the economy, right? If we actually look at 2021, like people are trying to kind of like revitalize from this 2000 from this COVID era, work from home and everything, and then there is the coup, and what comes with it is the internet shutdown, and then there is the internet shutdown came, and then when it came back, you actually have to use a VPN to even access Facebook to circumvent the new censorship, right? So yeah, and then there was also one phase which was called the whitelist period, which I believe was in mid 2021, and that it was actually made to actually elevate some of the stress that is put on the local businesses that is running, for example, banking application and the local services and everything. So they actually did this whitelist thing, and it was gradually phased out. But then what we are seeing is that, so with this new banning of VPN, and then there is the provision of this law stating some of the provisions, such as you have to register uh, with the authority to provide VPN access, and then you also have to register with them to provide cybersecurity to people. And then there is also talk among the telecommunication and ICT industry inside the country, is that after the VPN block, what they're actually doing is they're actually gathering the IP addresses of the local businesses and local servers. So, well, looking at this, they're actually trying to implement this censorship and the Chinese Great Firewall like system without impacting the local businesses. But there is going to be an impact because you will because the use of VPN and everything, it's going to be censored, it's going to be monitored, it's going to be surveilled. So it's kind of like so they have this concern about the businesses and the economy, but on one hand they have this issue, and on another they have to carry out this repression, this surveillance. So they're actually, so combining all these things, I think they're actually gearing up for whitelisting again. They have actually blocked providing VPNs and everything. And then they're actually gathering data from the local organizations, from the local farms and everything. And it could lead to just one thing, which is what we call a splinter net, something like the internet that is inside China that people don't get to actually get out, and you have to actually register with your personal information. Like you will have to give out your name, and your VPN provider will know what site you visit, what activities you are carrying out, and everything.
Yeah, and then more directly, right? So many of these provisions, they will be utilized for essentially political repression, and the military still confronts a widespread anti-coup resistance movement. Millions of people who refuse to acknowledge the legitimacy of military rule, especially for those people who feel this way and do politics in this way, but live in military-controlled areas. What do you think the effects of this new law is going to be on them?
It's going to get a lot worse. Like, for example, like personally as a trainer, it's a bit of relieving to see that the use of VPN itself is not illegal. It's not you can use a VPN that is legal, right? But then it's a very different situation on the ground, because even with the 2022 draft version and all these draft version, what we saw is that a significant abuse of this law, even with the draft version. For example, even in 2022, 2023, all this period before this law enactment, what we found is that their soldiers, the hunters military, they're actually checking for VPN. They're actually checking for devices, and they're looking for VPNs. They're looking for all these activities. And then we also have other mechanisms. For example, let's say we also have a conscription law. So the use of VPN itself is not illegal, but but if you have a VPN client installed on your device, it may put you at further risk that is not dictated by this law. And then for a civil society like us, for example, like us, MIP, like we're a digital rights organization. We provide digital safety practice too. And then what is happening is that we're actually doing illegal work, right? That's going to impact us. That's going to impact a lot of our activities. To actually really provide it, because like we have to, because to provide VPNs and also to provide digital security, you have to be registered with that.
Right, and the law also apparently applies to people who are outside Myanmar's borders as well. So even if you are an organization that relocates outside of Myanmar, you could still be prosecuted when you return to Myanmar. Before the last question, let's just take a quick break, Vox, for me to ask the audience who's listening. Do you like to laugh? It's important to blow off steam, especially when you're under stress. And this week, Frontier has published a great new feature by journalist Chaungtha, all about comedians and politics. Competing visions of the nation don't just play out on the battlefield, but on the stand-up circuit too. Check that out on the Frontier website. And while you're at it, make sure you have a listen to Frontier's other podcast, Do Adan, which means Our Voice, which is focused on human rights in Myanmar, with a huge archive of important episodes in both English and Burmese languages. Now for the last question, I want to go a little bit big picture. It's been 4 years since the 2021 coup, and things have gotten progressively more and more repressive when it comes to the control of information and communications in Myanmar. How significant is this law, and do you think that the Military State Administration Council is ultimately aiming for a kind of total censorship environment similar to a country like China, for example?
Well, yes, absolutely. Well, Myanmar itself is not very strange to digital authoritarianism. We are one of the very few countries that block HTTPS protocols back in mid 2000s. So yeah, with this law, with this law and with the existing technology framework, especially the firewalls that they have been installing in last year, and then in addition to the interception framework that they enacted, and then additionally, as what this law actually provided is like there is actually some parts in Article 50 of this of this cybersecurity law is that they actually contain parts that provide a framework for digital evidences. Digital evidences is what we didn't have. To provide an example, I mean, if you were to get prosecuted with 6060 or 505, you actually get prosecuted with the printed out papers of your Facebook page and all of these activities and things like that. But what this law actually contains is they actually going to digitize this system. There is actually the mention of this digital forensic lab and all these frameworks. So this is kind of like a framework that allows them to actually ramp up a lot of their activity. For example, there is intermediary liability that the companies that are operating inside Myanmar, like even applications, like even I mean, it's 10,000 users from a application provider side of view. It's not a lot of people. You can have 10,000. Yeah, I mean that's not a lot of people. So they're going to be liable for that. They're liable to keep the data. They're liable they're liable to provide the data. So intermediate liability, and then there is that is going to add on to the existing that is going to add on to the existing surveillance capabilities and framework. And then it's what we're actually looking at is kind of like a surveillance state in its inception. It's a process. It's going to be an actual surveillance state.
Wow. Well, a total surveillance state. Let's really hope not. And many people, just like yourself, are doing their best to fight that from happening with all of your trainings and everything that you do with your organization. So thank you, Vox, and thank you for coming on the show to discuss this law with us. Your organizations are linked to in the show notes beneath this episode, so I do encourage everybody listening who wants to contribute or learn more in some way to contact Vox through those organizations. For a third time, thank you for coming on What's Happening in Myanmar.
Yeah, thank you, Gutazen. Thanks for our invitation, and thanks for the talk.
It was so good to have you here, and I'm really glad that you could find the time. Now, that brings our episode to a close for this week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in again. Please remember, you can email the show. We love to receive your emails. You can send correspondence to whi.myanmar@proton.me. I look forward to broadcasting again on January 31st. Until then, take care and farewell.